Manager calls police on homeless man, but discovers too late that he is the new owner of the restaurant. In a busy restaurant in the heart of New York City, Steve, the arrogant and racist manager, believes that his strict approach is the key to maintaining the quality of the place. However, his life is about to change radically when a humble-looking man, dressed in worn clothes and with a serene expression, enters the restaurant. Unaware of who this stranger really is, Steve decides to humiliate him and calls the police. But what he does not know is that this homeless man, David, is the true owner of the restaurant, returning unexpectedly to evaluate his business and his employees. Steve has always seen his role in the restaurant as an extension of his own ego. Coming from a middle-class family, he has dedicated his life to climbing the industry ladder, believing that his job is a symbol of power and status. Growing up in a small town, his limited and prejudiced view of diversity shaped his belief that some people do not belong in certain places. He dreams of becoming an executive in the restaurant chain, convinced that keeping the place exclusive is the way to achieve this goal. On the other hand, David, the man who appears to be homeless, carries a surprising past. African American, he inherited a restaurant chain from his family, but after losing his wife and child in a tragic accident, he withdrew from the business world, seeking a simpler and more supportive life. After years away, David decides to return discreetly, acquiring the restaurant where Steve works, to understand how his values are being represented. The restaurant's environment, which should be a welcoming space, becomes hostile when David enters. Steve, immediately disturbed by the man's appearance, approaches him with an arrogant attitude, insinuating that he is not welcome. David, with his natural calm, tries to explain the situation, but is interrupted by Steve, who threatens to call the police, convinced that he is protecting the restaurant's environment. The arrival of Officer John, a man known for his abusive behavior, intensifies the tension. He and Steve confront David disrespectfully, ignoring his attempts to explain himself. However, when David reveals that he is the new owner of the restaurant, the atmosphere changes drastically. The awkward silence that takes over the place is palpable, as Steve realizes that his world, built on prejudices, is about to crumble. The twist occurs when David explains that his visit is to evaluate the service and respect for customers. He fires Steve for his unacceptable behavior and, in an act of courage, files a formal complaint against John for racial slurs. This triggers an investigation that leads to the officer's dismissal and arrest, while the story begins to spread, attracting media attention and new customers to David's restaurant. As the restaurant transforms into a model of inclusion and respect, David becomes an example of resilience and justice. He is invited to events and talks about equality, while Steve, confronted with the reality of his actions, realizes how much he has lost by maintaining a closed mindset. John, for his part, faces the legal consequences of his actions, leaving a clear message about the abuse of power. Thus, David's story intertwines with the lives of those around him, challenging prejudices and showing that sometimes true wealth and success come from empathy and inclusion. As David settled into the restaurant, Steve found himself in a whirlwind of emotions. What was once a comfortable routine, where he felt in control, was now turning into a nightmare. The public humiliation he suffered in front of his colleagues and customers made him feel exposed, as if he had lost his armor of arrogance. He could not accept that a man he considered inferior had the power to destroy his career and self-image. Every detail of the situation bothered him: David's serene gaze, the way customers began to whisper about what had happened, and the disdain his colleagues felt for him. The atmosphere in the restaurant changed quickly. The employees, who once feared him, now looked at Steve with a mix of pity and disdain. Among them was Maria, a young waitress who had always dreamed of having her own business. She had admired Steve's determination, but after seeing his true nature, she began to question her own aspirations. Maria became increasingly close to David, seeing in him an example of resilience and kindness. Her growing friendship with David made her feel that she finally belonged to a space where people were valued for who they were, not for what they appeared to be. Meanwhile, Steve tried to hold firm in his position, but the difficulties piled up. He faced the resistance of customers who, inspired by David's new leadership, began demanding changes to the menu, decor, and the way they were treated. Criticism became constant, and comments on social media began to affect the restaurant's reputation. The pressure was becoming unbearable, and Steve found himself surrounded by a feeling of helplessness. He did not know how to react to this new reality. and the fear of losing everything he had worked for consumed him. Each day, the restaurant felt more like a battlefield. David's team, made up of people from diverse backgrounds and stories, was determined to transform the place into a welcoming environment. They organized community events, promoted diversity, and gradually won the hearts of the customers. On the other hand, Steve felt increasingly isolated. He tried to reassert himself, but his attempts were met with laughter and disdain. Frustration began to manifest in his personal life. His girlfriend, Anna, who had always supported him, was now disappointed with his actions. She pressured him to change, to join David in building a better environment. But Steve refused to listen. He was not ready to give up his pride. The situation reached a climax when, in a meeting with the employees, David decided to address the topic of inclusion. He asked everyone to share their experiences and suggestions on how to make the restaurant a more welcoming place. Hearing stories of discrimination and prejudice, Steve began to feel a wave of guilt and shame. David's words echoed in his mind, challenging his deeply rooted beliefs. He remembered the times he had ignored his employees' needs and focused only on his own success. This epiphany made him question whether he really was the manager he thought he was. However, Steve's resistance did not disappear instantly. When the team voted to implement a new, more inclusive management system, he vehemently opposed it. He argued that it would hurt the quality of service, but his words sounded empty. The employees were tired of his arrogance and began to unite against him. Tension mounted, and Steve was about to lose not only his job, but also the dignity he valued so much. Meanwhile, David was becoming increasingly respected and admired. People saw him as an authentic leader, someone who had overcome immense challenges and was willing to listen and learn. He was becoming an inspiring figure, attracting not only customers, but also potential investors interested in supporting his inclusive business model. The difficulties Steve faced were not just external, they were beginning to erode him from within. He found himself in a dilemma: continue the fight for control or yield and learn from David's experience. The fear of failure paralyzed him, but the idea of failing to become a better version of himself tormented him even more. He began to question his beliefs, his identity, and what it really meant to be successful. Steve's internal battle was just beginning, and he found himself at a turning point. The need to reinvent himself became increasingly clear, but he still hesitated to take the first step. The reflection of his old life began to fade, while the new reality, with all its complexities and challenges, emerged before him, demanding that he choose between remaining stagnant or opening up to change. Steve was at a crossroads. The meetings with the team became an emotional battleground. Every time David opened his mouth, the words sounded like a direct criticism of everything he had built. David's calm and firm tone of voice, which had once irritated him, now made him feel a deep discomfort. He could no longer ignore the fact that most of the employees were on David's side. The stories he heard about discrimination and prejudice haunted him, but the idea of changing still felt like a threat to his identity. Tension increased every day. On one of those days, after a meeting where David presented a new project for a fundraising event for a social cause, Steve felt compelled to act. He stood up, his voice trembling, and began to criticize the idea, claiming that the restaurant did not have time for such things and that the focus should be on increasing profits. His colleagues' reactions were immediate, some disapproving glances, others whispering support for David. What had once been an environment where Steve felt secure now seemed hostile and cold. Maria, who had been quietly observing the situation, decided to speak up. She stood up and challenged Steve, asking how he could ignore the opportunity to do something positive, not just for the restaurant, but for the community. Her words echoed off the walls of the establishment, and Steve felt small. He never imagined that a waitress, someone he considered inferior, could confront him in that way. Indignation mixed with shame, and he withdrew from the room, unable to deal with the strength emanating from Maria and the other employees. In the days that followed, Steve began to notice the emotional impact that the situation was having on him. He could not sleep well, often waking up at night with a restless mind, thinking about the changes David was implementing. The pressure at work became unbearable, and he began to suffer from constant headaches. His girlfriend Anna was worried, but he pushed her away whenever she tried to talk about his feelings. He felt surrounded by a whirlwind of emotions, anger, fear, and a growing sense of helplessness. The relationship between Steve and Anna was deteriorating. She was frustrated with his refusal to see the situation in a new light. On a tense night, After yet another argument, Anna said she could no longer stand by someone who was not willing to change. That statement hit Steve like a punch in the stomach. He realized he was losing not only his position at work, but also the people around him. The feeling of loneliness began to set in, and he found himself reflecting on his choices. Meanwhile, David continued steadfast on his journey. He organized a community event that attracted a crowd of customers and new investors. David's innovative ideas were transforming the restaurant into a warm and vibrant place. Maria stood out as one of the main organizers, showcasing her leadership and commitment to David's vision. Positive energy radiated from the location, and customers were welcomed with genuine smiles and attention. Everyone was coming together around a common goal, and the restaurant was thriving. On the other hand, Steve was becoming increasingly isolated. He tried to reaffirm himself, but his attempts were met with indifference. Social media was filled with praise for David and his team, while criticism of Steve multiplied. The pressure pushed him to a breaking point. In a moment of desperation, he decided to confront David directly, seeking an opportunity to regain control. However, the conversation did not go as he expected. David, with his usual calmness, listened to him, but in the end, told Steve it was time for him to reflect on his actions and the impact they had on others. Steve's frustration and anger exploded. He was not prepared to hear the truth that David was offering him. Instead of opening up to change, he decided to shut himself off even more. That choice, however, came at a high cost. With each passing day, the restaurant thrived while he sank deeper into his own bitterness. The idea of reinventing himself seemed not only distant but almost impossible. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure on Steve only increased. The people around him were uniting and growing, while he isolated himself in his own prison of resentment. The dilemma he faced, to change or remain stagnant, became increasingly oppressive. He knew the life he was living was no longer satisfying, but he still didn't know how to take the first step toward transformation. The emotional tension was rising, and the choice Steve needed to make seemed harder each day. On a sunny morning, Steve decided it was time to act. The accumulated pressure had made him restless, and he needed a diversion, something to pull him out of that spiral of negativity. With an unexpected impulse, he decided to go to the restaurant even though it was his day off. He wanted to see the team in action, watch how David and Maria interacted with the customers, perhaps feel some inspiration in the vibrant air they seemed to breathe. Upon arriving, a scene hit him hard. The restaurant was crowded, but what impressed him most was the joy on the employees' faces. Maria was in the midst of the crowd, laughing and chatting with customers as if they were longtime friends. The atmosphere pulsed with energy, and Steve couldn't help but feel a tightening in his heart. He realized that while he was sinking into his own bitterness, the team had found a purpose and a connection that he could no longer see. As he watched, a small incident occurred. A child, with a bright smile, knocked over his juice cup, and the colorful liquid spread across the floor. Before Steve could think about stepping away, he saw Maria quickly crouch down to clean up the mess, while David approached the child, offering comforting words. "Don't worry, it happens to everyone. We'll make you a new juice," David said with a warm smile. The way he cared for each customer, big or small, made Steve feel a chill in his stomach. It was a skill he no longer possessed. The scene struck him like lightning. The genuine joy of Maria and David contrasted sharply with the bitterness he had been accumulating inside. He remembered when he first started at the restaurant, when there was passion in his work and a desire to make a difference. That memory made him question, where had he lost himself? The weight of his own loneliness began to feel unbearable, and for the first time he felt truly vulnerable. In that moment of revelation, Steve decided he needed to talk to David. He didn't know what he would say, but he felt it was essential to express his desire to change, to understand what had happened to him. With a racing heart he approached, his mind full of doubts, but also of a new purpose. David, noticing Steve's presence, smiled and gestured for him to join him at a table. The conversation didn't start as Steve expected. He hesitated, searching for the right words, while David watched him with an understanding expression. Finally, Steve let it out. "I don't know how I got lost. I used to love this job, but now I just feel anger and frustration, and honestly, I don't know how to change that." The vulnerability in Steve's words made the air around them feel heavy, but David didn't hesitate to respond. "We all have difficult moments, Steve. The important thing is to recognize that we are ready to change. Do you remember what made you fall in love with this place? The connection you had with the team and the customers? Perhaps instead of focusing on increasing profits, you should focus on building relationships again." Those words hit Steve with unexpected force. He realized he had allowed himself to be swept away by the relentless pursuit of results and numbers, forgetting what really mattered. The criticisms he had made of David, the barriers he had raised, all of that was a defense against change. But more importantly, he realized he was losing himself along the way. After that conversation, something changed within him. Anger began to give way to reflection. He remembered the days when he walked into the restaurant with a smile, ready to make a difference. What if, instead of fighting against change, he allowed himself to be part of it? The weight in his chest began to dissipate, and the idea of starting over filled him with hope. In the following days, Steve made an effort to reconnect with his team. He began to attend meetings not as a critic, but as a collaborator willing to learn. The tension began to ease, and he realized that by opening up to dialogue, he was also making space for personal growth. The emotional impact of the change was profound. He learned to appreciate every interaction, every smile, and the importance of feeling part of a community. Steve's journey was just beginning, but he felt he had taken a significant step. By confronting his failures and accepting the need for change, he began to see life from a new perspective. The true measure of success was not just profit, but the joy and connection he could cultivate around him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt there was hope for him and for the future of the restaurant he loved so much. In the days that followed his conversation with David, Steve noticed a subtle yet powerful transformation within himself. He started waking up earlier, not out of obligation, but out of excitement for a new day. Instead of dragging himself to the restaurant, he got ready with a smile, remembering the importance of every detail. Upon entering the restaurant, he felt a warmth in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. However, this new perspective didn't come without challenges. The first week was filled with small victories and huge obstacles. Steve tried to reconnect with the team, but some employees still carried the tension of the past. He realized that trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight. Maria, who had always been his ally, seemed hesitant to open up to him again. During a break, he approached her. "Hi, Maria. I wanted to apologize for how I acted before. I was lost and didn't realize how much it affected all of us." Maria looked at him, weighing his words before responding. "I understand, Steve, but we still need time. Trust takes time to return." Those words echoed in Steve's mind. He knew he was on a journey of rediscovery, but now he also needed to respect others' time. Frustration visited him from time to time, especially when he saw the team hesitate to trust him again. He wondered if he would really be able to regain their respect and friendship. One afternoon, while organizing the kitchen, Steve found an old letter he had written to himself at the beginning of his career. In it, he described his dreams and hopes for the restaurant. As he read it, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He realized that he had lost sight of those ideals. What had once been a source of inspiration had become just a distant memory. With tears in his eyes, he decided he could not let that vision die. He wanted not only to regain his passion, but also the joy that had been lost. As days passed, Steve began to implement small changes. Instead of focusing only on the tasks to be completed, he started to value interactions with the team and customers. He organized a tasting event where everyone could share ideas and recipes. The enthusiasm in the air was palpable. Maria, David, and other employees began to engage, bringing their own suggestions and contributing to the menu. This not only improved the work environment, but also rejuvenated the spirit of the restaurant. However, not everything was easy. Some customer criticism still affected him deeply. One night, a dissatisfied customer began shouting about a poorly served dish. Steve felt the old urge to defend himself, to justify every mistake. But instead, he took a deep breath and approached the customer. "I apologize for your experience. What can we do to make this right?" The customer's response was unexpected. He calmed down upon seeing Steve's sincerity and ended up sharing his suggestions. By the end of the conversation, the customer left satisfied, and Steve realized that empathy was a powerful tool. On this new path, Steve began to open up more with his team. In a meeting, he shared his insecurities and fears. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but I'm here to learn and grow with you." Reactions were mixed. Some employees seemed reluctant, while others, like David and Maria, offered support. This vulnerability helped break down barriers. Gradually, the atmosphere in the restaurant began to change. However, new challenges arose. Financial pressure was still a reality, and Steve knew he needed to find a balance between passion and results. He began to work longer hours, dedicating himself to understanding the restaurant's finances. This, in turn, created a new kind of stress. He felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. At night, he often sat alone at home, reflecting on the choices he had made. The weight of responsibility bore down on his shoulders, but he was determined not to give up. In one of those moments of introspection, Steve received a message from Maria. She invited him for coffee. During the conversation, Maria said to him, "Steve, you're doing well, but don't forget to take care of yourself too. Change takes time and you don't have to carry all of this alone." Those words resonated in his mind. He realized that to lead his team, he also needed to take care of himself, and more importantly, he needed to allow himself to be vulnerable and ask for help. Steve's journey was far from easy, but he was learning to navigate the complexity of his emotions and the dynamics of work. He had taken the first steps to reconnect with his passion and his team, but he knew there would still be challenges ahead. The true change, he understood, was a continuous process, and he was willing to face it step by step, day by day. In the days following his conversation with David, Steve began to notice a change within himself, a transformation that felt magical. He woke up earlier, not out of obligation, but out of pure excitement to face a new day. As he prepared for work, a smile appeared on his lips, reminding him of the importance of every detail in the restaurant. Upon entering the place, a warmth in his chest enveloped him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. However, this new perspective didn't come without challenges. The first week was a roller coaster of small victories and big obstacles. Steve tried to reconnect with his team, but some employees were still stuck in a troubled past. Maria, his former ally, seemed hesitant to trust him again. During a break, he decided to approach her. "Hi, Maria. I wanted to apologize for how I acted before. I was lost and didn't realize how much it affected all of us." She looked at him with a mixture of understanding and caution. "I understand, Steve, but we still need time. Trust takes time to rebuild." These words echoed in Steve's mind. He was on a journey of rediscovery, but he needed to respect others' timelines. Frustration visited him, especially as he noticed the team's hesitation to trust him again. He wondered if he could regain their respect and friendship. One afternoon, while organizing the kitchen, Steve found an old letter he had written to himself at the beginning of his career. In it, he described his dreams and hopes for the restaurant. As he read it, he felt a wave of nostalgia. He realized he had drifted away from those ideals. What was once a source of inspiration now seemed like just a distant memory. With tears in his eyes, he decided he couldn't let that vision die. He wanted to reclaim not only his passion, but also the joy that had been lost. As the days passed, Steve began to implement small changes. Instead of focusing solely on tasks, he started to value interactions with the team and customers. He organized a tasting event where everyone could share ideas and recipes. The enthusiasm in the air was palpable, and Maria, David, and other employees began to get involved, bringing suggestions that revitalized the menu. This initiative not only improved the work environment, but also reignited the restaurant's spirit. However, not everything was easy. Customer criticism still affected him deeply. One night, an unhappy customer began to shout about a poorly served dish. The old impulse to defend himself arose, but instead Steve took a deep breath and approached the customer. "I apologize for your experience. What can we do to make this right?" To his surprise, the customer calmed down upon seeing Steve's sincerity and ultimately left satisfied, leaving Steve with a new understanding. Empathy was a powerful tool. On this new path, Steve opened up more with his team. In a meeting, he shared his insecurities and fears. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but I'm here to learn and grow with you." Reactions were mixed. Some employees appeared reluctant, while others, like David and Maria, offered support. This vulnerability helped break down barriers, and the atmosphere in the restaurant began to gradually change. New challenges arose as financial pressure was still a reality. Steve knew he needed to find a balance between passion and results. He started working longer hours, dedicating himself to understanding the restaurant's finances. This generated a new type of stress. At night, he often sat alone at home, reflecting on the choices made. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but he was determined not to give up. In one of those moments of introspection, Maria invited him for coffee. During the conversation, she said, "Steve, you're doing well, But don't forget to take care of yourself too. Change takes time, and you don't have to carry all of this alone. These words resonated in his mind. He realized that to lead his team, he needed to take care of himself and allow himself to be vulnerable. Steve's journey wasn't easy, but he was learning to deal with his emotions and the dynamics of work. He had taken the first steps to reconnect with his passion and his team, but he knew challenges were still ahead. True change was a continuous process, and he was willing to face it, step by step, day by day. With every small success, with every renewed friendship, Steve felt stronger and more prepared to face the ups and downs of life. He was finally on the path of overcoming and growth. Steve was at a critical point in his journey. After months of hard work and attempts to regain his team's trust, he faced the biggest challenge he had ever encountered. The restaurant, which was starting to rise again, was facing an impending financial crisis. Sales were declining and bills were piling up. He knew he had to do something quickly, but the pressure left him anxious and insecure. That Friday night, the atmosphere in the restaurant was tense. The place, which used to be filled with life and laughter, had a heavy air. The tables were somewhat empty, and the staff, although dedicated, seemed discouraged. Maria, who had become a great ally, looked at Steve with concern. "We need to talk. There are rumors that some employees are thinking of leaving. They don't see a future here." Maria's words hit Steve like a punch in the stomach. He remembered how it all started. The passion for the restaurant, the joy of working with a united team. And now, he was about to lose it all again. Uncertainty consumed him, but he knew he couldn't allow fear to take over. Determined to act, Steve called an emergency meeting with his team. He knew he needed to be honest and vulnerable. As he gathered with them, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "I know things aren't easy. The restaurant is facing serious challenges, and I am responsible for that. But I'm here to ask for your help. We need to come together and find a way to overcome this together." The silence filled the room. He could see the expressions of skepticism on some faces, but he also noticed the genuine concern of others. David was the first to break the silence. "Steve, we are with you, but we need a plan. We need to know that there is a future here." With a lump in his throat, Steve began to outline a plan. He proposed a series of events that could attract new customers and revitalize interest in the restaurant's food. Additionally, he suggested that everyone share their ideas and suggestions for the menu. "Each of you is an essential part of who we are. Together, we can create something amazing." The team began to discuss, and little by little, a spirit of collaboration began to emerge. Maria, who had been hesitant before, started to share her ideas for a culinary event that would highlight special dishes from different cultures. David also got excited, proposing a budget-friendly food day to attract new customers. The energy in the room was changing, and Steve felt hope rekindling. However, Steve's true test was yet to come. On the day of the event, an unexpected storm unleashed over the city. The streets were flooded, and the flow of customers was drastically reduced. Despair began to take hold of Steve again. He looked at his team, who were ready and excited, but the reality was harsh. The event could be a failure. But instead of succumbing to negativity, Steve decided to take action. He picked up the microphone and began to speak. "Folks, I know the situation is tough, but let's do the best we can. Let's open the doors and offer exceptional service to anyone who can come. Even if it's just a few people, let's make them feel special." The team agreed, and together they decided to do their best. To their surprise, some people began to enter the restaurant. They were seeking shelter from the storm, and upon seeing the welcoming environment and the smiling staff, they decided to stay. Steve and his team served each customer with dedication, and gradually, the restaurant began to fill up. That night, as they served customers, Steve felt something special. He saw smiles, laughter, and the camaraderie he had lost. The team was collaborating like never before, and the restaurant began to sound like a home again. When the storm passed, Steve realized that they had not only overcome a critical challenge, but also strengthened bonds that were fraying. By the end of the event, even with the storm, they achieved an unexpected profit. More importantly, the team came together and the trust that had been shaken began to be restored. Steve looked at Maria, David, and the others and smiled. "We're in this together, aren't we?" The enthusiastic and supportive response from everyone made Steve realize that even in the face of difficulties, the love and passion for what they did were stronger. He learned that true wealth came not just from material success, but from unity, friendship, and mutual respect. Steve's reflection on his journey was no longer just about the mistakes made, but about the lessons learned. He realized that vulnerability, empathy, and collaboration were the keys to his success. The restaurant was not just a business, but a space where dreams and relationships could flourish. And thus, he knew that transformation was not a destination, but a continuous journey of growth and learning. After the storm, the restaurant not only survived, but began to thrive in ways Steve had never imagined. In the days following the event, the team was closer than ever. They gathered every morning to discuss new ideas and strategies, and the atmosphere in the restaurant was filled with positive energy. Steve noticed that the trust that had been lost was slowly being restored, not only in himself, but also among the team members. Maria, with her renewed enthusiasm, began to organize monthly events that attracted new customers and created a sense of community. David's suggestions for the menu were well received, and the dishes he proposed became customer favorites. The restaurant was starting to be recognized in the neighborhood again, sales were rising, and discussions about layoffs became a distant memory. One morning, as Steve organized the ingredients in the kitchen, he felt a wave of gratitude. He remembered the fear he had felt weeks ago and the uncertainty that had loomed over him. He recalled the meeting where he opened up to his team, admitting his weaknesses and asking for help. Now he saw the fruits of that moment. The team was not just a group of collaborators, they had become a family. During lunch break, Steve joined Maria and David in the break area. They were discussing the upcoming ideas for the event that would celebrate the city's culinary diversity. "Steve, we can't forget to include the live music night. That will attract even more people," Maria suggested excitedly. David agreed. "It's a great idea. The combination of good food and music always attracts customers." Steve smiled, admiring their passion. "You're right. Let's make this happen. And how about we also invite some of our loyal customers to participate as guest chefs? This way we can strengthen our bond with the community even more." This conversation brought a new energy to the group. Everyone was filled with ideas and enthusiasm, an impressive transformation compared to the apathy that had dominated the atmosphere months before. Joy was back, and Steve felt part of something bigger than himself. He realized he was no longer carrying the weight of the restaurant alone. Responsibility was now shared. However, not everything was perfect. Steve knew that there were still challenges ahead. He had to manage the restaurant's finances more carefully and ensure that the recent success wasn't ephemeral. One day, while reviewing the accounts, he found some unexpected expenses. His heart raced, and insecurity threatened to resurface. But instead of giving in to panic, he decided to call a new meeting with the team. He said that they needed to be transparent about their financial situation. Sales were better, but they still had challenges to face. He wanted everyone to know that their contributions were essential for overcoming this. The team listened attentively. Maria, always quick to offer support, said that they were a team. If they needed to adjust the menu or find ways to save, they would do it together. David added that they could also run a marketing campaign. They would use their social media to showcase what they were doing. The conversation was productive and full of valuable suggestions. Steve felt a wave of relief as he realized that regardless of the challenges, the team was willing to fight for what they had built together. He recognized that open communication and collaboration were key. As the weeks went by, Steve noticed changes not only in the restaurant, but also in himself. He was more confident and sure of his decisions. He learned to listen to his team and value every idea, no matter how small. That journey of challenges had transformed him into a stronger and more resilient leader. That night, as he was closing the restaurant, Steve looked around and saw what they had created together. The laughter, camaraderie, and passion were back, and he knew that no matter what the future held, he would not be alone. With a smile on his face, he said goodbye to the team, feeling more grateful than ever for having found not only a path to success, but also a true sense of community and belonging. Steve watched his restaurant thrive in ways he had never imagined. The storm that nearly destroyed him had turned into a catalyst for change. He learned the importance of unity, transparency, and teamwork. The team had become a true family, each member contributing their unique skills, and together they faced challenges that once seemed insurmountable. With the growth in sales and an increase in customer frequency, Steve began to reflect on what success really meant. It wasn't just about numbers or profits, but about the community that had formed around him. He realized that by opening his heart to the team, he had created an environment where everyone felt valued and motivated to contribute to the common good. The nights of live music and culinary events were not just ways to attract customers, but a way to celebrate the diversity and unity that now reigned in the restaurant. However, Steve knew that financial challenges were still present, and he couldn't ignore them. In a moment of vulnerability, he decided to open up to his collaborators about the situation. The support and ideas that emerged from that conversation were transformative. They were not just working to save the restaurant, they were building something lasting together. This new approach brought Steve renewed confidence, a certainty that the team was capable of facing any obstacle. As time passed, the restaurant became a symbol of resilience in the community. People began to talk about the place that not only offered delicious food, but also a welcoming atmosphere where everyone felt at home. Steve was moved to see old customers returning and new patrons falling in love with the space. Every smile and every compliment was a reminder that they were on the right path. However, a shadow from the past still loomed over Steve. The old rival, a restaurant that had always tried to overshadow his success, was not pleased with the achievements that Steve and his team were reaching. In an act of revenge, the rival tried to discredit the restaurant by spreading malicious rumors. But instead of succumbing to despair, Steve's team came together even more. They decided not only to defend their name, but to show, through actions, the true essence of their work. With a positive social media campaign highlighting their commitment to quality and community, Steve and his team turned the situation into an opportunity. The community's response was powerful. Loyal customers began sharing their experiences, creating a wave of support that dismantled the rumors. The restaurant not only weathered the attack, but emerged stronger, solidifying its position as one of the best spots in town. Steve felt a wave of gratitude. He realized that through challenges, he had learned the importance of resilience and the power of community. His journey was not just about saving a business, but about building meaningful connections and learning valuable lessons about leadership and friendship. The true reward was seeing his team united and strong, working toward a common goal. Looking toward the future, Steve knew that any challenge that arose would be faced together. And so he invited everyone to reflect on their own experiences of overcoming adversity. He challenged them to find strength in difficulties and to value the relationships they build along the way. He asked them to share their stories, as each account had the power to inspire others. The true strength lay in unity and the ability to turn challenges into opportunities. At the end of his journey, Steve made it clear that regardless of what the future held, the true success was the community they had built together.